Hello YouTube, this is Morgan, Airspeed Prime here at my next Airspeed's Korra Rewatch video. This one's going to be for K307 Original Airbenders, the middle episode of the book, because obviously the last two books, 13 episodes, there are 6 before this one, 6 after this one, so we have the middle episode for the first time. This is what brings us kind of over that halfway mark, and it's an interesting episode. I in some ways really like love this episode because like obviously I love airbender culture, it's my favorite element, so seeing an episode that's completely focused on it is great. It's just that I feel this episode tries so hard to kind of cram in everything that they need to about the airbenders. It tries to, this has to be the episode to kind of reintroduce that plot point because we haven't been with them since like episode 4. It feels like this is trying to fit 2 episodes into one. There's so much that they try to do in this seemingly, I suppose, more character-focused episode, but then it's just like, okay, there's a plot with Jinora, Kai is getting some development, Tenzin, of course, is the kind of focus of the episode, Bumi's in there, all the other airbenders as well, plus like we have to show them training and all this stuff, and then they also decide to cram in this Sky Bison hunter plot in at the end to give it some action, and it feels like, whoa, calm down. Like, this episode would have worked if it was just character development. I think this would have worked equally fine if you didn't have the Sky Bison hunter stuff at the end. Similarly, I think it would have worked equally well if they had maybe done it as 2 parts. More character focused, and then continue that into an episode, and the second one maybe is more action centric and you can develop it more. As it is, you kind of get sort of lesser versions of both sides of the episode, and it kind of just in the end comes out to a solid episode that there's nothing massively to complain about, but think of how good it could have been. And I think this episode in a way represents it's like a small version of how I kind of in general feel about the entire book of book 3. That being that there's so much going on when you really think about it, but there's not enough time to develop everything in the way that it should be. And I think that this is an example, this book, in a way, of the show trying to use the like Avatar The Last Airbender format of having a lot going on, but it not working because the Korra episode count does not allow you to have enough time to do all that sort of stuff. If book 3 had 20 episodes, there's time for everything. You have time to develop all the airbender stuff, you have time to develop the Red Lotus, the side plot with Lin and Sue, everything. As it is, there just isn't enough time, and this episode kind of signifies that when we started this book, the airbender stuff was the absolute focus. It's the driving force so far in the series, given that the Red Lotus have yet to fully make their mark just yet. It in a way still is the driving force, yet this episode and the fact that we have to return to the airbenders after the Lin and Sue stuff is weird in a way, because it should be the main focus, and it kind of still is by the finale, but it's just so kind of confused because the Red Lotus just kind of tend to come in and out of the show as they need to, and because they're not developed, they don't feel like the main plot, and then you're just so confused about like what's going on here. Like, Korra isn't really invested with the villains. She's now on her own, kind of separately than Tenzin and the Airbender plot, and it's just kind of like, so your main character is very separate than everything else that's going on. The Airbender plot in Zahir hasn't really like overlapped just yet, and we're just at this point where like there's stuff happening in the book, but it's not all coming together, and when it does, it's a case of all the individual stuff didn't have enough time together to really get the development that was needed. But let's really delve into this episode and where it sort of has its flaws. I think I'll lead with this in case I forget about it, and that is the setting. We're in the Northern Air Temple, and obviously it looks better now. Obviously they're using it for airbender stuff, but continuity point here. When was the last time we saw the Northern Air Temple? It was back in 117 of Avatar. where's that stuff? Like, where's all the like mechanical aspects, the mechanists, that kind of that group, that group of refugees? Did they become air acolytes? I don't like that they just don't address the history of this place for the most part. The obstacle course kind of gives you a little hint that, like, okay, maybe some of the technology is still present, but I kind of wished we had maybe seen this kind of separate group up there that maybe weren't air acolytes, but were living in kind of harmony with the air acolytes, or something along those lines. Just a reference to what we saw before, because they never really established that, like, the mechanist and his kind of family, like, just left, so it felt like it needed an explanation. Not that I think it's a huge point to be critical of the episode on, but it's just, why haven't you addressed this? And I've mentioned this a few times with book 3, of just it doing stuff that kind of references previous things, and it just being very random as to whether they feel the need to actually explain what went on in between the series versus when they don't. This one, I feel they should have, because I feel it's a simple explanation. You don't need to go in depth, but I would have liked to see just what the explanation is for this. Because, like, the other temples, like, it's fine, it makes sense. They were all, in general, like, abandoned, with only, like, Guru Patik living at, like, the Eastern Temple. But this one actually had stuff going on with it, so what's the situation with it? But otherwise, let's get into the plot. So the core of this episode is Tenzin's struggle with how to teach the new Airbender recruits who actually want to be there, but he's trying to introduce them to a culture that is very different than anything they've kind of encountered before. And we've seen before from earlier on in this book, and like elements of it with how he approached training Korra initially, he struggles to adapt his culture and kind of, I suppose, make it sort of inviting to people. And that comes to light here with everyone, including Boomy, who he starts by kind of telling them these really long stories at, like, meditation, and doesn't know how to get across the kind of fun aspects of the culture. Anytime there is something fun, he's kind of like, oh no, it'll take years to get to that point, with the Sky Bison or any of the fun stuff. And then we see over the course of the episode him sort of taking advice that's given to him by the likes of Korra, by Boomy, but him not taking it, like, in the exact way that they said to, and that is that he still kind of wants to lead everything, so he just kind of takes Boomy's advice rather than what Korra suggested, which was, let Boomy be like a teacher as well. Let the kids be teachers as well. Let them have a focused role also, in that they're the new generation. What's their view on things? And them as kind of people who've grown up younger, can relate to it better. That is a better way to do things. And Jinora, who is right on Tenzin's level, seems perfect for that, because she has the book smarts. You can tell she's a good teacher based on what Kai has said before. She, in a way, is the perfect one to actually guide people going forward, even more so than Tenzin. And you just see how he struggles with it, because this is his dream. From the get-go, the fact that he is the one who is there present as the main master within the Airbender culture at a time when Airbenders are coming back. This is his dream. He wants this to be a success, and he's trying as hard as he can. He just can't remove himself from the fact that this culture is very different, and he has to accept the fact that it's going to be a struggle to really keep everyone invested on every front. And that's where I think the two scenes, the first one with him talking to Korra, and then the later scene of him talking to Pema, are so good within this episode. They are really, really highlight scenes from this episode. With Korra, it's really cool to just see her over the phone, getting across how well she understands the people that she's with, and that she can give Tenzin this advice. And you know, the second she says it, that, like, it's spot on advice, that this will instantly make things a success. She knows that Bumi's a commander, and because of that, he's a good leader. And because he's also a new recruit, they'd listen to him a little bit more, rather than Tenzin, who's the kind of master that they're all a little bit kind of intimidated by just how kind of intense he is in a way about the Airbender culture. And you can play in the fact that if Bumi thinks this is his idea and he's doing something really good, he'll get really into it. That's the sort of character that he is. And then introduce more fun elements by having the kids teach some stuff. It showed Korra like really understanding the people around her, and I think that was really good to see. And Tenzin acknowledging that, like, wow, you're really turning into quite a wise avatar. And it was just a fun conversation that kind of showed this sort of shift in dynamic in their relationship, where it's not really masters like a student in a way anymore. It is more of a just, you know, obviously Tenzin's the older person. He'll always be there to help Korra with certain things, but that, you know, she can help him. There's a friendship there where she can give him advice just as he can give her advice, and I really like that. And then obviously he ends up, you know, taking that advice, but instead of incorporating Bumi into like helping him train everyone, he just asks Bumi what he thinks he should do, and Bumi sort of comedically says, you know, like, you should lay down the law a bit more, and he goes complete military on it, and it just doesn't work. He drives people away, and the one person he does drive away completely is Bumi because of it. He basically forces Bumi to quit, and along the way, like, Jinora is stepping in, kind of saying, I think you're being too harsh, I think you're going too far. And eventually she's put in charge because Tenzin gets overly frustrated. And I really like this scene because in the meantime, Kai has been kind of putting it in like Jinora's head that, like, you're a really, really good airbender. Like, why don't you have your arrow tattoos? You seem just as good as Tenzin. Why aren't you, like, teaching, more heavily involved in this? Why are you just in the background? And she kind of realizes this, that it's taken someone who she sort of respects, like Kai, to tell her this, to sort of get her really going on this. And so she starts to bring up this idea of, like, when she's put in charge suddenly, I'm the master now, what about my arrow tattoos? And Kai gets in a little bit of trouble, and it eventually, obviously, she kind of walks off, that she has that little outburst that you completely understand, of like, she's not just a little kid anymore, she's more spiritual than Tenzin. She basically knows just as much airbending as him, knows so much about the culture because she's the kind of book smart one. She has all of the tools to be a teacher, to be on a very similar level to Tenzin, but he's holding her back just because she's young, just because she's Tenzin's daughter. And that's the kind of cool thing about this episode, in that this is a scene that was needed for Jinora. Jinora needed to sort of have this outburst, and that's sort of the positive side of Kai, which is, it's sort of an Opal thing as well, like Bolin kind of helping Opal to speak to her mother. It's Kai bringing this sort of more, you need to actually bring this up to Tenzin about this, and she does, and that's the good side of Kai and his relationship with Jinora, which we see is very much developing quite well, to the point where the other acolytes are considering them a couple. Like, we have one of the guys from Kai's friend, I suppose, from the Earthbender camp, saying, she ran off with her boyfriend, and that was just a fun little scene to see that they're really, really playing into this, and it's being well developed. The scenes of them together with the Baby Sky Bison, as they kind of give you some extra insight, and that, like, wild Sky Bison take a lot of time to be kind of tamed. The mother bison are very, very protective, which is what we see. And it's an interesting one because the bison here, like, they never confirm it, but it almost seems like so perfect that this group of baby bison and this mother, like, is that mother the bison that Korra had, that was given to her by the kind of shaman on Bonte Island? And then are her bison cubs the bison that Jinora eventually gets, Kai eventually gets, and Opal eventually gets? What is it? Kai has Lefty, Jinora has Pepper, and then Opal has Juicy. they just get those in the kind of intermediate time. Is it these bison? Because they seem to form this bond with them. They see them kind of fly for the first time. Kai especially, obviously, like, you know, we see him later on with a sky bison, and it seems like he forms a bond with at least one of them. So I think that the Kai Lefty thing is completely confirmed. Whether or not from the same batch, you know, same cubs, Janora and Opal's bison come from, I'm not exactly sure. But that would be a really cool thing, and I like getting to see sky bison because they are, you know, one of those original bending animals. That's the name of the episode. Ultimately, comes back to that. Getting to see the kind of cute scenes at the end, the kind of darker tones in the middle of the episode when the sky bison kind of hunters come in and grab them, and find out that the Earth Queen is eating exotic animals, that she hates them so much in a way, but likes eating them. Pretty dark, especially when it's like this urban legend that like the Earth Queen ate Bosco. Crazy little reference there in that you sort of believe it in a way, but you can't fully just say, yeah, that's completely canon of like this is the death of Bosco. But it's crazy, and it's another little thing to get across. You know, another reason to hate the Earth Queen and disregard for like endangered animals and so on. But anyway, this episode, you have Boomy as well. Like they kind of focus a bit on this idea of, you know, he's getting on with the other recruits, even though most of them are so much younger than him, and they seem to respect him because he's much more like laid back. Similarly, they seem to kind of respect most of the kids a bit more as well because they're more laid back, I suppose, minus Milo. And Tenzin's the only real teacher they seem to take an issue with. But Boomy has the respect of this group, but he is the one to really heavily be like forced out by Tenzin's teaching tactics after the advice. And I like it because it is this kind of thing of like he this is what he wanted. He wanted to kind of be a part of the culture a bit more because he was the non-bender. Now he has this opportunity to kind of really get invested in this culture now that he is an airbender, but kind of Tenzin's in a way ruining it for him. But I love the kind of turnaround in that when the news comes out, Janora connects with the spirits, relays that information through Boomju to Boomy, who's also spiritual, and everyone except Tenzin is involved in this rescue attempt, and they follow Boomy's lead here, and he is the one to, I think, properly bring the group together as like truly they are all now airbenders. They're part of this culture now. Just the words in the speech, you know, like we have to get 2 of our own back, you know, 2 of our own are missing, you know, leave no airbender behind. Just the sense of like they're all fighting for the same culture here, that they won't let, you know, the return of this nation be stopped by these sky bison hunters who've captured Kai and Janora. So really cool scene. Like they play on a lot of stuff they kind of set up earlier on in the episode with like Dog getting his head shaved, and then kind of, you know, the reveal that they didn't have to do that, but that he gets an advantage because of that. He sort of senses the wind of the net being fired at him and dodges it. You see some of the training that they have done begins to work as they all kind of rally together behind, you know, Boomy's leadership to get, you know, some of their key members back. That it really is becoming this kind of family, this community, like you expect of airbenders being a very close-knit culture. And it's kind of all coming together here with, you know, Boomy, Iki and Milo like kind of leading the charge here, Kai getting released, him going after Janora, Tenzin helping out, the Sky Bison kind of the mother coming in. And, you know, the hunter obviously isn't much of a character. He's just meant to be like, you hate him because he is after endangered animals. But it allows for like Kai to have that kind of heroic moment where he sort of impresses Tenzin with obviously how much he cares about Janora, saving her like that, but also with just how skilled he is. He's the one where they definitely get across in this episode. He's the most advanced of the new airbenders, and he's really, really quickly advancing in that he's already got his own glider and is really good with it. To the point where he can go out with Janora and there really be no problem, and chase after the car like he does. And then how he takes out the hunter at the end is really Tenzin says, good technique, but also kind of scolds him as well, that like it was good technique, but airbenders don't do this. We don't attack unarmed opponents. But I like that you saw that little bit of fire from Kai, that he was angry about it. He cared about the bison and wouldn't let this happen. It's showing that the group, even though they're not all on board with everything about the airbender culture, they are getting invested in it. Like groups of friends are forming. They're all on board with the idea that they're now kind of allies. They don't want any of them to be taken. They all care about the Sky Bison, and it's a meaningful moment for sure, just because it is them kind of coming together as a group, and for Tenzin at the end to kind of see this, it means a lot, and it's meant to be the getting past all of the issues. It's by the end of the episode, him realizing that he can't just always treat Jinora as a kid. She is the next master. He has to acknowledge that. He says he's going to think about her tattoos, but you can tell from the way he speaks before that he's more or less made his mind up, and I think that's completely justified with what Jinora did last book, and I think what confirms it for her, what really earns her tattoos, is what she does at the end of this book. And the implication that I think she is pretty heavily involved in the training after this. Bumi is involved in the training, and so on. And that's where I wish that there was a bit more on this. This is where I think one of the big issues potentially is that one of the immediate next things we get is that Opal is sent out to the Northern Air Temple. Unfortunately, we never see her arrive. We don't really get her introduction. Next time we see Opal, she's just captured. A little bit of training has been done, but she's just been captured. I think it almost would have been better if they had waited a little bit longer, had Opal come out, and then have almost like maybe a three-parter, where you have effectively this episode, but Opal's included as well as part of the group. You get to see her be introduced to everyone else, like her and Kai meet and so on, her meet Tenzin. You have, the Bison stuff happen, but then you also have, eventually I suppose you probably have to have a skip somewhere in there, and then have the Red Lotus attack the Air Temple, and obviously set up the kind of finale stuff. But I think the problem is that they kind of mishandle things a little bit. It gets a little muddled of like, Opal's introduced, but we don't actually see her fulfill her dream, basically. But we had a whole Airbender episode just a little bit ago, where she could have actually added a lot to the episode. And I think that's just the thing with this episode. There's so many, like, you could have done this, you should have done this. As I said, it's a fine episode on its own. It's just, it is kind of bursting at the seams that, like, not everything gets the time it deserves. The Sky Bison Hunter plot is a little just, like, it comes up, is immediately resolved. It's nice, it's cute to see the baby bison, of course, with the whole, like, lesson at the end of, like, you saved them, so the mother trusts you now. You are the same, basically. They're the original Airbenders, you're Airbenders. There's a bond between you because of that. The understanding that the form of our bending, or the martial art behind it, comes from the Sky Bison. That's cool. The, like, Jinora kind of and Tenzin thing, I think, probably needed a little bit more time. I like it on Jinora's side. It's just that it feels a little weird that he has this kind of revelation after she's just been kidnapped. And I think that's where the slight issue is here, in that you sort of have to have Kai have his hero moment, and Jinora makes the most sense as the character to save. But you also want to keep Jinora strong in this episode as well. And I wish they didn't have her be the one to get kidnapped. And that's where I think maybe if they went out with Iki, maybe Iki was the one to be kidnapped, and then Jinora and Kai together are the ones to kind of take out the Sky Bison Hunter to free Iki, or maybe Milo is the one to get captured. Something along those lines I think would have worked. Even if it was actually like Tenzin who's the one to get captured, rather than just the plot point be that, like, let's not tell Tenzin what's going on here. Imagine he was the one who was just out there looking at the bison. The hunters end up capturing him, and he's with the bison, And then everyone else forms together under the leadership of Bumi, Jinora, Iki, and Milo, with Kai being right in there. That would have been a cool way to do it. I think, and imagine if Opal was in there as well. She gets a chance to prove herself. If you'd really done a bit more with this, I think this being a focused plot would have meant a lot more, which would have made what they do with the Airbenders at the very end, with Jinora getting her big moment, with the tornado and stuff like that, that would have been even more impactful because you would have had more time with these characters to develop them. And I think this is where I think this is one of the books that definitely suffers the most from having a low episode count, of just, there's a lot of good kind of subplots going on here, but there's so much stuff that could have, and I think should have been covered. I've already talked a lot about the Red Lotus needing it, the White Lotus needing it, the characters, but here I think, Opal I think needed more time. I think you could have done a little bit more with Janora's arc specifically. I think Kai actually is done very well. I think there was a little bit needed after this of just, okay, now that the episode is over, what has Tenzin actually learned? How's he going to change up how he approaches doing things? Like I said earlier on, that obviously what happens is that basically Korra's advice from before is incorporated, where the kids are all used to train a bit more, the Bumi's used a bit more, and then Tenzin has a better idea of what to do. That's the implication, but does that actually kind of pan out in the end? That's what's unclear, because this plot, we don't get back to it for a while. And I think that in itself is part of the problem with this book, is that you get invested in one subplot, and then it's left and gone away from for a bunch of episodes. And then when we come back to it, it's like, could you fill us in on what's going on here? No, okay. What about this one? No. And it's just, they all come together in the end, and it feels smooth. It feels like it's all working together, but then you realize that nothing is developed enough. And that's the same thing with this episode. The Sky Bison plot with the hunters comes and goes very quickly. Janora's arc is done very quickly in this episode. Bumi's arc, super quick. It's good, but think of what it could have been. And I think that's the thing here. And again, I want to make it very clear, I like this episode because it's so different. It really is, to make the pun in a way, a breath of fresh air. Just getting to see the focus on the Airbenders and see, Tenzin kind of be the main character in this episode. Jinora and Kai get focuses within the episode. Bumi be that kind of main of the minor characters. And just seeing the culture kind of come back. It plays its role, but it could have been a lot better. So I think that's most of what I want to talk about. As I said, I think probably my favourite scenes in the episode are Tenzin's talk with Korra, and then his talk with Pema, which I don't think, did I really go into that earlier on? I suppose, just in case I haven't, I think the Pema talk is probably my favourite in the episode. I think it's probably my favourite scene in the episode. One, because we don't get a lot of scenes with Pema and Tenzin to get across the strength of their relationship. So it's a very notable scene for them to see how well they work together. And it's also a little bit of backstory on Pema. We know that she's an air acolyte, of course, but here is her talking about the fact that she, obviously is from one of the other nations initially, and chose to become an air acolyte. And of course we see her as, the mother of the Airbender. She's completely incorporated into this. She's one of the more knowledgeable air acolytes, of course. But she also had to have that transition from living a normal kind of life in one of the other cultures to suddenly adapting to all this kind of craziness. And just something as simple as her saying the Airbender bed was such a struggle to get used to. And Tenzin's just like, it's actually better for your back. Like, he knows all of the positives of it, but the point is that it took time to adjust. She wanted to be there. She wanted to be involved in the Air Acolytes, but it still took time, and it's going to take time for all of these people, regardless of how invested and how eager they are to become air acolytes and airbenders and be part of the culture. It's a challenge because it is so different, and I liked her giving that perspective to him, and that's why it's such a cool thing to have her be this kind of non-bender character who, you know, is the mother of all the kind of young airbenders for the most part. So excellent scene with Pema there for sure. I think it's really good. The Korra scene from earlier on is good as well. Kind of showing you that this book, when it does character writing, is actually really, really well done. The last 2 episodes with Lin and Sue, excellent. Korra, even though she doesn't have a plot so much in this book, is really enjoyable to see throughout the book. And then whenever they're actually tackling plot stuff, like the introduction of Opal, the introduction of Kai, what they do, and could have used a little bit more focus in this episode, it's well done. It's purely from like a plot reason and like time, the amount of time focused on everything, that is where the problems come in this book. I understand to a degree why it's often considered the best book of Korra, but to me, there's just too many like, but we didn't learn that, we didn't get that, this wasn't developed enough, that I can't see it as the best book. I can see where the potential is to get there, and if we learned more, if we got these backstories, it kind of adds on to book 3. Maybe then book 3 goes up in my estimation, but we haven't got those backstories, so that's kind of where we're at here. So good episode, but you know, I think an episode that has its issues, and if those issues were fixed, this could have been an amazing episode, or like an arc, depending on how they did it. So that's my review for Original Airbenders. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on this episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.